The little girl lay crumpled at the river's edge, weak, injured, abandoned, her small fingers white-knuckled around a frayed red scarf, eyes wide and empty as the storm howled over her. Wind tore along the banks like a living thing, shredding spray into needles. The river, swollen by days of melt and sudden rain, ran black and fast beneath a skin of broken ice. Branches scraped the sky. The world narrowed to the hiss of sleet, the thunder of water, the thin tremor of a child's breath. A beam of light slashed through the storm. Boots slid on mud. "I've got movement," a man's voice called, low and controlled. A black and tan German shepherd surged ahead, muscles coiled, nose cutting the wind. "Shadow, easy." The man's gloved hand flicked, and the dog flowed from a sprint to a poised stalk, a line of purpose on 4 legs. "Mark and hold." Shadow angled his body between the river and the child, tail low, ears forward, the steady rumble in his chest warning away the cold and the dark. The girl flinched at the nearness of the dog, then stilled as warm breath feathered her wrist. The scarf slipped, showing skin mottled with old yellowed bruises and fresh violets, a wrist rubbed raw where tape or rope might have been. The man knelt, one knee sinking into the half-frozen grit. "Hey," he said, breath fogging. "I'm Ethan. This is Shadow. We're here." He kept his hands where she could see them, palms open, like a prayer. Rain carved lines down his jaw, caught in the trace silver of a beard that had once been darker. Under his jacket, a dog tag flashed and vanished, old metal, older vows. The girl didn't answer. Her lips were split and pale. She only clutched the scarf harder, the fabric stretched and thin in places, a single embroidered letter hanging by a thread, L. Another sheet of sleet slammed through the trees. The bank groaned, earth-saturated, peeling away in clumps. Ethan measured distances automatically, river to girl, girl to dog, dog to him. The calculations lived in muscle and bone, hammered in by deserts and alleys and doorways where time collapsed, and the only thing you could hear was your own breathing and the metronome of a watch you couldn't take off. Shadow, bridge. The command was soft, a shared language carved by years. The shepherd eased forward, lowering himself until his shoulder was almost a step, his body a barrier against the slide. The child's eyes flicked to him. In that amber gaze there was nothing sharp, nothing hungry, only the quiet gravity of a creature who had learned to be a wall in a world full of wind. "Can you reach me?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone level. "We need to get you off this edge before it gives." She swallowed. A tear, or just meltwater, traced the bruise at her cheekbone. When Ethan shifted, her body recoiled with a lightning-quick flinch, the kind that doesn't come from weather. He stopped moving. Shadow breathed, slow and patient, and the girl's hand crept from the scarf to the dog's fur. Her fingers sank in. Something in her shoulders unlocked by half a notch. "Good girl," Ethan murmured to both of them. He slid his rescue blanket from the pack and opened it with a crackle that made the child wince. "It's just foil," he assured softly. "It sounds louder than it island." His hand hovered, waiting. She looked at Shadow again, as if the dog could translate the human. Shadow's tail beat once a small, deliberate tap against the mud. The girl nodded, tiny, and Ethan folded the blanket around her, careful not to trap her wrists. The ground beneath them shuddered. A fissure raced through the bank, water sucking at the break. "We're moving now," Ethan said, calm as a metronome. "Shadow, step." The shepherd shifted, taking weight, and Ethan slid one arm under the girl's knees, one behind her shoulders. She was lighter than she should have been. Heat poured off her in the wrong way, shock heat, the body burning its furniture. His left rib sang a lightning bolt ache from an old fracture that visited when the barometer dropped. He locked his core the way the therapist had taught him and moved anyway, up the grade, left foot, right, weight over Shadow. A rank, rotten crack ripped through the air as a section of bank sheared and fell. The river swallowed it whole. They made the road by inches. Ethan's truck loomed in the blur, white, crusted with salt, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat. He lowered the girl to the back seat on a folded wool blanket, snapped the heat to high, pressed a foil packet into her hands. "Sip," he said, twisting the cap. "Slow. It'll be warm in a second." Her eyes tracked the bottle as if it were a trick. Shadow hopped up, curled his spine to fit hers, chin on her shins, a living hot water bottle wrapped in discipline and patience. The girl's hand found his ears again and stayed. "Good boy," Ethan said, because some words are always true. He closed the door and leaned his forehead into the wet night for a beat that wasn't about fatigue. rain stitched cold across his scalp. He saw, just for an instant, a bed with rails, a smaller hand than this one, the beep 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 of a machine counting seconds that didn't feel like life. He blinked hard, opened the driver's door, climbed in. "Name?" he asked, eyes on the mirror. The girl's gaze skittered away. Silence. Shadow's tail thudded once, soft. The scarf shifted in her hands. That single letter hung there, making promises. "Okay," he said. "No rush." He put the truck in gear. The wipers thumped. On the shoulder, tire tracks bitten by the rain curved in and out again, too fast, too sloppy, pointed at the same stand of trees Ethan had passed on the way down. He lifted his phone, thumbed open the camera, quick snaps of tread pattern, width, splay. He sent the pin to a single contact with a preloaded code that said everything he didn't have time to: welfare check, evidence, child recovered, urgent. A flash of lightning lit the river like cold steel. Thunder rolled late. The girl flinched so hard the bottle rattled against her teeth. Ethan eased the truck toward the old bridge and back again, away from it. In the mirror, her eyes were wide and wrong young. "No big lights?" she whispered, hoarse, barely there. "No big lights," he echoed. "Just us, kiddo." As the heater breathed, her color climbed from blue toward waxy pink. The tinny radio crackled with weather warnings, the voice flat, the message clear: roads flooding, stay home. He turned the volume down. Shadow lifted his head, nostrils flaring toward the passenger window, and uttered a sound that wasn't quite a growl. Alert, not threat. "What is it?" Ethan asked him, automatically. The dog's ears pointed like compass needles toward the tree line. Between storms, the night held its breath. From somewhere not far too close for comfort, the faintest crunch of gravel under a slow tire. Ethan killed the headlights. The world turned to dim shapes and memory. He slid his hand under the driver's seat, felt the hard plastic of a flashlight, the softer, worn strap of a trauma kit, the cold of a legal sidearm he hadn't needed to unholster in years. His fingers paused there, then moved away. Not yet, not for a shadow with tires. "Stay down," he murmured, though the girl had already folded into the blanket like she knew how to become a smaller target. Shadow placed a paw over her shin-light pressure, a signal he used with nervous rookies and exhausted medics when the air went thin. Headlights knifed through the trees, flicked off, slid on again. A vehicle idled out of sight, engine rumbling like a throat clearing. Ethan's phone buzzed once. A reply. "On it. Patrol rerouted. 10 out. 10 minutes can be a long time." Ethan eased the truck forward, tires whispering over wet asphalt. He took the long way toward town backlots. A service lane behind the old feed store, the narrow cut that paralleled the river, then veered toward the clinic. In the rear view, the black swallowed the shape of the bridge. "Where do you hurt?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she curled more tightly around the scarf, pressing it to her mouth as if it could hold words in, as if words were dangerous. Ethan caught the edge of his own reflection. Steel blue eyes older than their 40-something years, the scar at the hairline no longer hidden by anything he cared to grow. He looked like a man who had learned the hard way what he could and couldn't save. He felt Shadow's gaze in the mirror, two dog eyes that said, "Stay with me, we've got this one." The truck's tires hissed across standing water. Sleet spit against the windshield. The clinic's sign would be coming up, a little white cross on blue, flickering on a good night. He pictured Patel's steady hands, cocoa in wax cups, the closet with blankets, and the staff's unasked questions she knew to save for later. A shape stepped out into the lane. Ethan braked hard, the seatbelt biting. Shadow's claws clicked once on the rubber mat, and then were still. The figure was a man in a dark jacket, hood up, the rain making his outline leak at the edges. He lifted a hand, not a wave. A block, head tilted, watching the cab, not the truck. Every muscle in Ethan's back tightened, then went quiet, a practiced hush. He dropped the truck into reverse a foot, then park. He didn't reach for the sidearm. He reached for Shadow's harness, slid 2 fingers under the chest strap, felt the live wire readiness thrumming there, the restraint that years had taught. "Stay," he breathed. The man took 2 slow steps closer, boots in water. Lightning stitched the sky. In that rip of hard white, Ethan saw the face, cheekbones sharp, eyes fever bright, a mouth set in a line that had nothing to do with the weather. The stranger's gaze slid past Ethan over his shoulder, into the back seat. "Don't," Ethan said, softly. The girl's fingers tightened around the scarf until her knuckles whitened. Her voice, when it finally came, was no louder than the river's hiss. "I'm so lost," she whispered. "Please, don't make me go back." The man outside smiled without warmth and reached into his jacket. Rain sheeted down the windshield, blurring the figure outside into streaks of grey. But Ethan's instincts sharpened through the distortion, cataloguing details: the too-still posture, the hood pulled low, the glint of something metallic shifting inside the man's jacket. Beside him, Shadow tensed, a low rumble vibrating through his chest like a warning drum. Ethan's hand hovered near the gearshift. 10 minutes out, the message had said. He doubted they had 10 seconds. The little girl pressed herself into the corner of the seat, knuckles white around her scarf, whisper still hanging in the cab. "Please, don't make me go back." Those words cut through Ethan harder than any storm. He felt his ribs tighten against memory, the helpless beeping of monitors, his daughter Emily's small hand clinging to his, and he knew he couldn't fail another child. "Stay low," he said quietly, eyes fixed forward. "Shadow guard." The shepherd shifted instantly, body coiled, eyes locked on the stranger through the glass. His growl deepened, not wild but controlled, the kind of sound that made men rethink their choices. The man outside hesitated, his hand still buried in the jacket. He took one step closer. Ethan lowered the window halfway, rain spattering in, cold air slapping his face. "You don't want to do this," Ethan said evenly, his voice steady as steel. "Back away, now." The stranger's mouth curled into a half-smile that didn't touch his eyes. "She doesn't belong to you," he said, words barely audible. Over the storm. "Step aside. I'm here to take her home." Behind Ethan, the girl whimpered and buried her face in Shadow's fur. The dog pressed against her, tail stiff, gaze never leaving the man. "You call this home?" Ethan snapped, his tone sharpened, every syllable a blade. "She's half frozen, bruised, terrified. Whoever sent you already lost the right to call themselves family." The man's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." He pulled his hand free, not with a weapon but a cell phone, the screen glowing even in the rain. He raised it like proof. "They'll come for her. You can't stop it. Papers, custody, the law's on their side. You'll be branded a kidnapper." Ethan's fingers flexed on the wheel. The word law hit like grit in his teeth. He'd seen laws twisted before contracts forged, children left behind, soldiers discarded when the mission ended. His breath fogged white, and for an instant, Emily's face flashed before him again. "Daddy, don't let go." He leaned forward, blue eyes locked on the man. "Then tell them to hurry," he said, low and final. "Because as long as she's breathing under my roof, the law can go to hell." Shadow barked, explosive, and the man flinched. It wasn't fear in his eyes, more like recognition, as if he'd expected this defiance. Then he backed away slowly, step by step, rain plastering his hood to his skull. He didn't run. He melted into the storm, swallowed by dark and sleet. The glow of his phone winked once, then was gone. For a long beat, silence roared louder than the rain. Ethan's grip eased on the wheel, though his pulse hammered like a war drum. He turned to the girl. She trembled, wide-eyed, her lips barely forming words. "He knows Mark," she whispered. He always comes first. Then Mark. Always." Ethan's jaw tightened, his mind slotting the name into place. Mark, the shadow behind the bruises, the phantom she feared. He forced his voice calm. "You're safe here," he said. "No one's taking you tonight." Shadow laid his head gently on her lap, amber eyes soft now, as if promising it himself. The girl's shaking eased by fractions. Ethan pulled the truck into gear again, headlights still off, navigating by memory in the faint reflective posts along the road. His muscles stayed tight, scanning every angle, but his thoughts burned on the name. Mark. A man who hurt children and called it family. Mark. The reason a girl whispered, "I'm so lost," instead of "help me." As the clinic lights finally came into view, pale blue against the storm, Ethan realized something had shifted. This wasn't a rescue anymore, it was a war. And for the first time since Emily's death, he felt ready to fight again. The storm had thinned to needles of rain by the time Ethan nosed the truck into the narrow lot behind Street Bridget's community clinic. The building's lighted cross flickered through the downpour, blue-white against the black. Ethan killed the engine, but left the heater running. For a moment, the cab was only breath and heartbeat, the girl's ragged, shallow, shadows steady. Ethan's held too long. He twisted in his seat. "We're going inside," he said softly. "No big lights, Just a friend who knows how to help." The girl's eyes darted up, grey and hollow, then fell to Shadow, who shifted closer until her fingers brushed his fur. Her lips trembled, but she gave the faintest nod. Ethan swung out, rounded the truck, and lifted her carefully into his arms. She weighed so little, he thought bitterly, like carrying memory more than flesh. Shadow padded alongside, every step measured, amber eyes cutting the shadows. The waiting room nurse Patel met them at the back door, a short, round woman in her 50s, with dark hair streaked in silver. She didn't waste time on questions, only ushered them inside, locking the door against the storm. Her eyes softened when they fell on the child. "My God," she whispered. "Come, quickly." Inside, the waiting room glowed warm, muted. No harsh overheads, just lamps and a soft hum of a heater. Patel guided them to a cot tucked in the corner, draped with blankets. Ethan set the girl down gently. She clutched the scarf still, knuckles chalk white, even as the nurse wrapped her in flannel. "Temperature's low," Patel murmured after a quick scan. "Dehydrated, bruising." She caught Ethan's gaze. Her eyes asked more than her lips. Ethan shook his head once, a silent answer, not safe to send her back. Patel didn't press. "Hot cocoa," she said instead, bustling off. Shadow stretched on the floor, head pillowed on his paws, watching every twitch of the girl's frame. Ethan crouched beside him, elbows on his knees. "She trusts you," he murmured. The shepherd's tail tapped once, slow and deliberate. The whisper. The girl sipped cocoa with trembling hands, eyes fixed on the steam as if afraid of what waited beyond it. Ethan waited, letting the silence hold. He knew this dance. Pressure only shattered what was already cracked. At last, her voice came, so soft he leaned close to catch it. He said, "I was a mistake." The words landed like ice water down Ethan's spine. He saw Emily again, not saying those words but asking, in her hospital bed, "Am I too much trouble, Daddy?" He'd sworn then no child should feel disposable. And yet here was another, branded with it by someone who should have protected her. Ethan forced steadiness into his voice. "Listen to me, kiddo. Nothing about you is a mistake. Nothing." Her grey eyes flicked up, glistening, searching his face as though testing if truth could still live there. Shadow pressed closer, muzzle nudging her wrist. A single sob broke from her chest. She bent forward, burying her face in the dog's neck, shaking. Ethan's hands curled into fists, nails biting his palms. He swallowed the anger. Now wasn't the time. Now was about her. "A name," Patel returned quietly, setting a folded blanket on the cot. "She'll sleep soon. Do you know her name?" Ethan glanced at the girl, still clinging to Shadow. "Kiddo," he said gently, "can you tell us your name?" For a long moment, silence. Then a whisper, muffled in fur. "Lily? Lily?" Ethan repeated, careful, like placing it on a shelf. The name fit her like the scarf, frayed but surviving. "That's a strong name." She nodded once, then yawned, exhaustion finally pulling her under. Within minutes she slept curled against Shadow, breath hitching in dreams. Shadow didn't move, a sentinel in fur. Resolve, Patel touched Ethan's arm. "She can't go back to whoever did this, you know that." "I know." His voice came out rough. He scrubbed a hand over his beard. "But you also know the system. Custody, paperwork, loopholes. Men like him know how to play it." Patel's gaze was steady. "Then find someone who knows how to fight it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He thought of Grace Morgan, a caseworker he'd crossed paths with during a volunteer job months ago. She'd fought like hell for kids most people wrote off. If anyone could stand between Lily and the man in the shadows, it was Grace. He looked at the child, asleep in Shadow's warmth, and something solidified inside him. For the first time in years, the hollow didn't feel so empty. It felt like purpose. Closing beat outside, the storm clawed at the windows, the river still raging in the dark. Somewhere out there, headlights prowled roads too close to home. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Lily's whisper would echo until he made it right. He laid a hand on Shadow's back, steadying himself. "We protect her," he murmured. The dog's eyes glowed in the lamplight. His tail tapped once, as if to say, "Always." Morning broke dim and heavy, clouds still swollen from the night's storm. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and cocoa, the kind of mix that clung to memory. Ethan had barely slept, posted on a hard chair, while Shadow dozed beside Lily's cot. Every time she shifted, murmuring in dreams, Shadow lifted his head to check. Ethan did too. By 7, headlights swept the lot outside. Ethan straightened, every nerve tightening until the knock came. 3 sharp raps, then a pause, then one more. A code, not random. Nurse Patel opened the back door. "She's here," she said quietly. A tall woman stepped inside, snow still on her boots. Grace Morgan, caseworker, 38 maybe, with hazel eyes that carried both exhaustion and fire. She shrugged out of her wool coat, revealing a simple sweater and the satchel slung crosswise, battered from years of carrying too many files and too few answers. Her gaze went first to Lily. The girl sat upright now, scarf clutched, Shadow's muzzle resting heavy on her lap. Grace's eyes softened, but her jaw set with quiet determination. She crouched, speaking gently. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's Grace. I work with kids and families to make sure they're safe." Lily's fingers tightened in fur. Shadow didn't move, but his tail tapped once. That seemed to decide it. Lily nodded faintly, though she didn't speak. Private words. Grace straightened, turned to Ethan. "Tell me what happened." He gave her the short version. The riverbank, the stranger in the road, Lily's whisper. His voice stayed calm, but each detail felt like another nail hammered in. Grace listened without interrupting, pen scratching across a small notebook. When he finished, she sighed. "This isn't neglect, this is abuse. And it sounds like Mark Dawson has someone covering for him, maybe more than one. If we push this through official channels too quickly, he'll get ahead of us." Ethan folded his arms, jaw tight. "Then what's the move?" "We file for emergency protective custody," Grace said. "But the court's going to demand proof. Photos, testimony, medical notes. You know how these men play it. He'll claim she bruises easy, that you manipulated her, maybe even that you're unstable." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Let him." Grace studied him, recognizing the steel under the grief. She nodded once. "Then we fight." Lily speaks. Later that morning, Grace coaxed Lily into a quiet corner. Ethan kept his distance, but close enough that Shadow could lie within reach. The girl's voice was thin, halting, but she told pieces. The basement door locked from the outside. The nights in the cold. The words, "mistake." Grace's pen stilled. Her throat tightened, but her voice stayed even. "Thank you, Lily. That was very brave." The girl's eyes flicked to Ethan, as if anchoring herself. He gave her the smallest nod. She pressed her face into Shadow's neck, whispering, "Don't let him find me." Grace overheard. Her gaze hardened. "He won't," she promised, preparing the battle. By midday, Grace had called a contact at Child Protective Services and arranged for photographs. A young investigator named Mia arrived, soft-spoken but steady, carefully documenting bruises. The red bands on Lily's wrists. She moved gently, explaining each step like a lullaby. Shadow lay beside Lily the entire time, a warm anchor. When Mia finished, she looked at Grace. "This is enough for an emergency hearing, but if Dawson has money or connections, he'll push back hard." Grace nodded. "I'll call Sarah Coleman, family attorney. If anyone can cut through Dawson's lies, it's her." Ethan listened, silent, but inside the decision was already made. He'd stand in that courtroom, no matter what ghosts he had to face, and fight. For Lily, for Emily's memory, for the vow he'd broken once and swore he wouldn't break again. Closing beat. As evening settled, Grace packed her notes, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the room. "Tomorrow, we start legal. Are you ready?" Ethan looked at Lily, curled asleep against Shadow, scarf still clutched in her fist. He heard her whisper again, "I'm so lost." His voice came low, steady. "Doesn't matter if I'm ready. She doesn't have anyone else." Grace nodded. "Then we don't lose." Outside, snow began again, light but steady. Somewhere out there, Mark Dawson would already know his hold was slipping. And a man like that never let go quietly. The courthouse smelled of old wood and paper, the kind of place where history clung to every surface. Outside, snow hissed against the tall windows, muffling the world. Inside, the air buzzed with hushed voices and the shuffle of coats shaken free of ice. Ethan stood at the defense table, shoulders squared, his steel-blue eyes steady despite the weight pressing against him. Shadow sat at his heel, disciplined and calm, yet his ears twitched at every new sound. The dog's presence drew whispers from the gallery, but Judge Rebecca Moore had allowed him, recognizing that Lily's courage was bound to him. Grace stood just behind Ethan, file clutched to her chest, exhaustion etched into her face. Beside her was Sarah Coleman, the attorney Grace had promised. Early 40s, sharp features softened by determination, auburn bob tucked neatly behind one ear. She radiated quiet fire, every movement controlled, every glance calculated. Across the room sat Mark Dawson. Navy suit pressed too neat, hair slicked back. But beneath the polish, anger simmered, flashing in his eyes like blades. His attorney, Daniel Price, was lean and composed, flipping through papers with a cold smile. They looked like men certain the system would bend to them. "Opening shots, all rise," the bailiff called. Judge Moore entered, robe flowing, her gaze sweeping the room. She was a woman in her 40s, dark hair streaked with grey, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "This hearing will determine emergency custody of minor Lily Carter," she said evenly. "Counsel, proceed." Price rose first, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, my client has endured a grave injustice. Mr. Dawson took Lily in after her mother's death. He provided food, shelter, and care. And yet this man," he flicked a glance at Ethan, "has unlawfully taken her. Furthermore, we believe the child has a history of exaggeration and self-inflicted injuries, exploited here to slander my client." Ethan's fists tightened under the table. He felt the old heat rising, the fight or flight that lived under his scars. But Sarah's hand touched his sleeve, grounding him. She stood slowly. "Your Honor, this is not a custody dispute. This is abuse," she said firmly. "We have medical evidence, photographic documentation, and CPS testimony. Lily Carter is malnourished, bruised, and traumatized. Returning her to Mr. Dawson would cause irreparable harm." Witnesses Grace was first on the stand. Her calm voice described what she had seen: Lily's fear, the bruises, the whispers of being locked in a basement. Her words carried both fact and compassion. Price cross-examined, trying to shake her composure. "Isn't it possible the child simply fell? Children bruise easily." Grace's eyes hardened. "Not like this," she said flatly. "These are patterned injuries, consistent with restraint and neglect." Mia followed, presenting photographs. Rope-like marks on Lily's wrists, fading welts on her ribs. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ethan stared at the images, his jaw tight. He forced himself to look, to witness, because Lily had lived them. Finally, Lily herself was brought forward. Small, fragile, scarf clutched in her hands. She sat stiffly in the witness chair, shadow at her feet, the judge having allowed it for her comfort. Sarah crouched to her eye level. "Lily, do you feel safe with Mr. Dawson?" Lily shook her head silently. "Can you tell the court why?" For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, Lily's voice, so small it barely reached the back rows. "He locks me in the basement. He says I'm broken." The room stilled. Ethan's chest ached. Shadow pressed against Lily's legs, and she touched his head with trembling fingers, grounding herself. Mark shot to his feet, face red. "She's lying. I never—" "Sit down, Mr. Dawson," Judge Moore snapped, gavel striking. Her voice cut through the air. The turning point, Sarah straightened, her tone controlled but edged with fire. "Your Honor, the child deserves safety, not more excuses. We ask the court to grant Ethan Hayes temporary guardianship while CPS completes its investigation." Judge Moore leaned back, eyes moving from the files to Lily, to Ethan, to Mark. The paws stretched. Ethan felt sweat prick his neck, his muscles locked against the urge to stand, to shield Lily right there in front of everyone. Finally, Judge Moore spoke. "The court grants temporary guardianship of Lily Carter to Mr. Hayes for 90 days. CPS will monitor weekly. Mr. Dawson, you are prohibited from contact until the investigation concludes." A hush fell, then whispers exploded in the gallery. Ethan exhaled slowly, a weight easing from his chest. Shadow's tail thumped once, but as Ethan glanced across the aisle, Mark's gaze met his, twisted with something darker than rage. A silent promise. This isn't over. Closing beat outside the courthouse, the storm had slowed to a bitter drizzle. Ethan stood on the steps, Lily clutching Shadow's leash, Grace and Sarah at his side. For the first time, the girl's lips curved in the faintest smile, a fragile thing, but real. Ethan looked down at her, and for the first time in years, felt something like hope stir in his chest. But Mark Dawson's shadow still loomed, and Ethan knew too well wars weren't won in a single battle. Snow piled high along the Portland sidewalks, muffling footsteps and swallowing sound. Ethan sat at Sarah Coleman's law office, the air warm but heavy with tension. Lily perched in a chair beside Shadow, her backpack clutched tight, pencil scratching over a notepad Sarah had given her. She drew houses, but they were cages more than homes, tiny stick figures outside, staring in. Sarah leaned across her mahogany desk, tapping a file with one manicured finger. "We've found something," she said, her voice calm but edged. "Mark Dawson isn't just abusive, he's profiting." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Profiting how?" Sarah slid a stack of documents forward. Bank statements, grant letters, medical forms, stamped with shaky signatures. Riverside Care Foundation, a non-profit that supports families with terminally ill children. For the past 2 years, Mark has collected regular payments claiming Lily was sick, cancer, specifically. Ethan froze, the word like shrapnel in his chest. His mind flashed back to Emily, pale in her hospital bed, tubes and monitors, her smile brave through agony. He clenched his fists. He faked it. Sarah nodded grimly. Forged medical forms, false diagnoses, staged photos. He turned Lily into a paycheck. Michael's analysis. To confirm the numbers, Sarah had brought in Michael Hargrove, a forensic accountant. Mid-50s, round glasses, voice warm but precise. He clicked through spreadsheets on his laptop, pointing to rows of deposits. "These align perfectly with Riverside's grant cycles," he explained. "Quarterly payments, each flagged for a terminal care subsidy. But look at the expenditures: gambling, electronics, personal luxuries. Not a cent for medical care." Ethan's jaw worked. "He used her." Michael's tone softened. "And he'll keep using her if he regains custody. Fraud like this isn't just financial, it strengthens the abuse. The more she suffered, the more convincing his case for funding." Sarah shut the file. Her green eyes burned with determination. "We build the case around this. It's not just neglect, not just abuse. It's exploitation. That makes it nearly impossible for him to regain custody." Lily's revelation. While the adult spoke, Lily wandered to Ethan's side. She tugged gently at his sleeve. Her whisper barely carried. "He made me take pictures." Ethan bent low. "What kind of pictures, kiddo?" Her grey eyes shimmered. "He told me to look sick, to cry. Sometimes he'd." She stopped, unable to finish. Shadow whined softly, pushing his nose into her palm. She clung to him, breathing into his fur. Ethan's chest ached. He smoothed her tangled hair back gently. "You never have to do that again," he said firmly. Sarah's gaze softened, though her voice stayed steady. "Lily, what you just told us is very important. It helps us stop him." The girl nodded faintly, though her body shook. Shadow leaned harder into her, anchoring her against the storm inside. The next step, that night, back at Ethan's house, the fire crackled in the hearth. Lily fed Shadow scraps of chicken, giggling softly when his wet nose tickled her fingers. The sound was rare but real, a fragile seed of healing. Ethan watched from the kitchen, tea cooling in his hands. For the first time in years, he let the sound ease the iron around his heart. Hope, it was dangerous to believe in, but he felt it anyway. Still, the discovery weighed heavy. Mark wasn't just a cruel man, he was desperate, calculating, and with fraud exposed, he had everything to lose. Desperate men were dangerous. Ethan set his mug down, eyes on the fire. He thought of Emily, her small hand clutching his during chemo, whispering, "Daddy, stay." He couldn't save her. But maybe he could save Lily. Shadow shifted, eyes meeting his master's, as if reading the vow forming in Ethan's chest. Closing beat. The next morning, Sarah called with urgency. "Detective Briggs is ready to move. With Michael's findings and Lily's testimony, we can push for a criminal investigation. But be warned, Mark will fight back. He won't surrender quietly." Ethan looked at Lily, curled up on the rug with Shadow. She was drawing again, this time a house with open windows, 2 figures, and a dog. Hope was creeping into her lines. But Ethan knew shadows still lurked outside those windows, and soon they'd have to face them. The knock came just after midnight, sharp, too sharp. Ethan's body was moving before thought caught up. He eased from the couch, Shadow already alert, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Lily stirred under her blanket, her small hands clutching at empty air until they found the dog's fur. Another knock, louder this time. Then, a voice. Mark Dawson's. "You think you can steal my girl and play hero?" The words slurred with rage. "Open the damn door, Hayes." Ethan's heart kicked into gear. Not panic, but training decades of it. He motioned Lily behind the couch, shadow pressing in front of her like a living shield. He grabbed the pistol he kept locked but loaded near the door. Old habit, one he'd hoped never to use again. Breaking point. The lock rattled, then glass shattered in the back room. Ethan cursed under his breath. Mark wasn't alone. Shadows moved outside, more than one set of boots crunching snow. "Stay down," Ethan whispered. Lily's eyes were wide, silent tears cutting her cheeks, but she nodded. Shadow pressed against her until she curled into a ball, hidden. The back door crashed open. Heavy steps. Ethan raised the pistol, voice like iron. "One more step and I drop you." Mark stumbled into view, flanked by two men. Ethan didn't recognize muscle, hired hands. His face twisted in a grin. "You won't shoot, not in front of her." Shadow's growl deepened, fur bristling. Ethan's finger hovered on the trigger, but his mind raced. Lily couldn't see him. Kill someone, not after all she'd endured. He needed another way. The fight. The first. Thug lunged. Shadow launched, jaws snapping, teeth clamping on the man's arm. A howl ripped the air. Ethan swung the butt of his pistol into the second thug's jaw, dropping him against the wall. Mark roared, rushing for the couch where Lily hid. Ethan pivoted, tackling him mid-stride. The two men slammed against the floor, grappling. Ethan's fists landed, Mark's too. Old training warred against raw desperation. "You think she's yours?" Mark spat, blood flecking his lip. "She's mine. My paycheck. My control." Ethan's vision flared red. He drove a knee into Mark's chest, snarling through clenched teeth. "She's not your anything." Lily's terror. From the corner, Lily's scream pierced the chaos. Shadow, still grappling the first thug, glanced toward her, as if weighing, fight or protect. Ethan saw it, shouted, "Guard!" The shepherd obeyed instantly, breaking off to barrel toward Lily. He planted himself over her, snarling, daring anyone to come near. Mark twisted beneath Ethan, nails clawing, voice venom. "You think one court order changes anything? I'll find her. I'll take her back." Ethan slammed his forearm into Mark's throat, pinning him. His breath came hard, chest heaving, but his voice was steady as steel. "Not while I breathe." Sirens, then sirens, wailing, cutting through the storm outside. Red and blue lights flashed against frosted windows. Grace's voice bellowed through a bullhorn. "Portland PD, step away from the child." Mark froze, eyes widening. Ethan pressed harder. The thugs groaned on the floor, one cradling a torn arm, the other unconscious. Moments later, officers burst in, guns drawn. Mark was yanked up, cuffed, dragged screaming. His words echoed like poison. "She's mine, Hayes. She'll never be yours." But Lily didn't hear. She was buried in Shadow's fur, sobbing, whispering into his ear. "Don't let him take me." Ethan knelt, pulling both into his arms, his voice cracked but held. "He won't. Not ever again." Closing beat. The storm outside raged on, but inside the war had shifted. Mark was in cuffs, but Ethan knew battles weren't won in one night. Courts, trials, memories, they all loomed. Yet as Lily clung to him and Shadow leaned heavy against them both, Ethan felt something break through the dark. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting ghosts, he was fighting for something worth living for, and he wouldn't stop. 6 months later, spring had thawed the hard Maine winter. The lake outside Ethan's new cabin shimmered under pale sunlight, framed by birches and pines alive with green. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh wood, the kind of scent that promised beginnings instead of endings. Ethan stood on the porch in a crisp grey shirt, beard neatly trimmed. He looked older, yes, but lighter too. The deep shadows under his steel blue eyes had softened. Today wasn't about war. Today was about family. Behind him, Lily stepped outside in a pale yellow dress Sarah had given her. Her blonde hair caught the light, no longer tangled but brushed, falling soft around her cheeks. She clutched her old backpack not because she feared losing it, but because she chose to keep it, scars and all. At her side padded Shadow, tail wagging slow and steady, ears twitching at every bird call. The court's decision. That morning, the courthouse had been different. No storm, no shouting, no venom, just quiet anticipation. Judge Rebecca Moore presided once again, her voice steady but kinder this time. "Mr. Hayes," she said, gaze steady on him. You petition this court to adopt Lily Carter to become her legal father. All reports are favorable. CPS, the psychologist, the guardian ad litem, the child herself. Lily had stood then, small but resolute, hand pressed against Shadow's head. Her voice carried in the hushed chamber. I just want to stay with Ethan. And Shadow, this is home. The judge's gavel fell with finality. Petition granted. Effective immediately, Lily Carter shall be known as Lily Hayes. Tears blurred Ethan's vision. He hadn't cried in years, not when bullets flew, not even at Emily's funeral. But now, as Lily's hand slipped into his, he let them fall. The cabin now, back at Sebago, Ethan fastened a small wooden sign onto the cabin's door. The Hayes family. Lily traced the letters with her fingers, smiling shyly. Inside, the walls were alive with drawings she had made. Dogs, lakes, suns, and sometimes stick figures with smiling faces. Always 3, a man, a girl, and a dog. That evening, they ate grilled chicken on the porch. Lily painted at her easel, strokes messy but bright, shadows stretched between them like a bridge. The sound of her laughter carried across the water, a sound Ethan once thought he'd never hear again, a whisper of the past. Later, when stars freckled the sky, Ethan tucked Lily into bed. She clutched Shadow's paw, eyelids heavy. Her voice came soft, nearly lost in the quiet. Ethan, do you think Emily would like me? The question pierced him, tender and sharp. He brushed hair from her forehead, voice low. She'd love you, kiddo. She'd say you're the best thing that ever happened to us. Lily smiled, drifting into sleep. Shadow curled close, his steady breathing filling the room. Ethan lingered at the door, heart full and aching all at once. Closing message. On the porch, Ethan looked out over the lake. Stars reflected like promises on the water. He thought of his wife, his daughter Emily, the battles he'd fought and lost. He thought of Lily, found broken by the river, and now whole again. He whispered into the night, we're a family now. Shadow pressed against his leg, silent and strong. And for the first time in years, Ethan believed in tomorrow. Because sometimes, the ones we save are the ones who save us.